Welcome to the Red Diamond Report podcast. I'm your host, Wilton Jackson, and today we have another great guest. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, she is a phenomenal reporter. I met Mia Berry. She's an HBCU reporter for ESPN's Andscape. Mia, we've been, following each other along the sidelines, covering HBCU sports, probably for like the last 2 years. I know for sure. It's good to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I started it off. I'm like, I haven't seen you since the Celebration Bowl, so it's great to catch up, great to talk, great to share my story as well. So I'm happy you thought of me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, Mia. Absolutely. So, before we get things started, I want you to tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, you already know my name, Mia Berry, Detroit, born and raised. So all my Detroiters, what up, though? You already know Detroit through and through. Notre Dame graduate. So we're going to talk a little bit about going to a PWI, covering HBCUs a little bit later. But I am a senior HBCU reporter for ESPN's Andscape. So everyone's familiar with ESPN's brand, but Andscape is, we do a little things different. We're centered and focused on Black culture and Black experience. So we try to write and report through a different lens. We don't just report, sports or culture. We go deeper and we dive deep into the stories, the traditions of, African Americans and Africans all across the diaspora. So that's what pretty much what I do at Andscape.
Believe it or not, some people don't know, like you said, the platform Andscape for ESPN. And when I've tried to describe to them and really tell them what it is, and I'm sure you have as well, what would you say is the most rewarding part? I get that you just listed that you know what the platform does, what it advocates, what it stands for, but what's the most rewarding part for you in terms of being a reporter for the platform?
I would say working with the office that is primarily African American. Before I even got this job, I've done a lot of internships. I've been in Boston, I've been in LA, DC, and going into a newsroom, I'm the minority. I understand it. For one, I'm a woman.
Right.
I'm a Black woman at that. So those are those two strikes. You don't see too many Black women in the newsroom
Right.
or any type of, website sporting. So when I came into Andscape and then you log on to that first meeting and I'm like, oh, Black people, Black women, Black men, we got everything. And it's just
Right.
beautiful to be in a workspace that you're comfortable. It's actually like the HBCU space almost. That's one thing, PWI being like the token Black person or being like the only Black person in a space, knowing that you have to represent for your entire race and culture. Whereas being in a space where you have people that understand you, understand the culture. And I also think that's a testament to some of the good work we do. Some people say they're about culture, they're about elevation of Black people, but don't hire Black writers. So it kind of misses a little bit. With Andscape, no, we have some of the best African American writers across the country. And I'm proud to be a part of that. I'm proud to be in that, rich wealth. We have Martenzi, we have Mark Spears, we have so many, Sheila Matthews, so many good Black journalists that not only do we work together, but me being a little bit younger, I forgot this. I don't tell my age anymore because I'm tired of people saying I have kids that age. But it's funny. Oh, one person got a grandkid at my age. I said, "Ooh, let me be nice." But they're also willing to take that time to mentor you. I think that's the most rewarding part, for a young journalist fresh out of college coming into their first professional job, being around, this nice familial culture with Andscape, Black writers. Everyone wants to see everybody win and succeed. And I think a lot of our readers, a lot of our viewers see that.
Being that you sit in the intersection between sports, race, and other elements as well, in dealing with HBCUs, what's the biggest difference that you see in the culture of, let's say, covering sports at PWIs and that HBCU culture? Because I mean, it's a term, it's a phrase that we hear often, but it's something about HBCU culture that makes it stick out beyond anything that we know. How would you describe that HBCU culture?
I would say it's not superficial, if that makes sense. I just growing up, being at Notre Dame, our care for the athletes was pretty much what you did on the field, what did the scoreboard say after that. There were cultural things that I didn't always get. They're playing Sweet Caroline. I had to learn that song. They're playing Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
Sorry, Swifties. I had to learn a couple songs. Is just, if you're not familiar with that culture, you really feel like you stick out.
right.
HBCUs, I'm not an HBCU grad. I'm very open and honest about that. I never want to claim to be something that I'm not. And I will dive deep later about how much help I've had along the way. But just HBCU, I love the way they've adopted me into, the HBCU culture. I've had people that I never knew that said, "Hey, let me pull you to the side. Let me tell you a couple things. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's figure some stuff out. Run some stuff past me. I can bounce ideas off." And this is coming from just someone that doesn't. I tell people I went to Notre Dame. Oh, okay. Because at first they're like, "I thought you would have went. You look like a Spelmanite to me. You
Oh
look like you would have
wow.
went to Howard." Funny thing is, Spelman was on my top three. I had someone. I was in Atlanta when they said that. They said, I said, "I didn't go to Spelman." They said, "You went to Clark." I didn't go to Clark, but I
Oh
love how the environment is. And I love how the care for every student and student athlete doesn't stop at their performance. They care about the athletes beyond what they do on the field. It's off the field. They care about students, that one-on-one time, the smaller class sizes, the teachers calling them. Just being on Twitter, I'm just reading people's stories. Oh yeah, I missed it. I was going through a hard time. My professor reached out to me, made sure I graduated, I stayed on track. And I love hearing stuff like that because honestly, I had some rough times. It was my family that got me through that. I think it means
mhm,
something a little bit differently when you go to an institution where it's the teachers. They're working just as hard as your family. And I've
right.
been through that. I tell people all the time, I didn't think I was going to be a journalist. I thought I was going to be a doctor. And just
Mhm,
going through that whole process, the science, the weeder classes, and that feeling of being pushed out, I felt that. Thank God it kind of steered me into what his plan and purpose was for me.
exactly.
At the time I felt hurt, but understanding that. So when I see teachers at HBCUs, I talk to them, I get to know them and see how much they care for their students. I'm like, wow, I kind of wish I had that, that high level of care. I did eventually at Notre Dame. I had you find a couple black teachers that didn't even teach journalism that saw you on campus and took you in and showed you that love and support.
Right.
But I was just thinking, how much better would my college experience have been if almost every teacher would have been like that?
You're from Detroit. What
Yes,
up?
born and
I'm not from Detroit, but I just like when people say that. Like I really admire when people say that. It just sounds good, but I know I can never truly understand what that really means. So I'm gonna ask you as a person who was born in Detroit, what does that mean? Like when somebody says what up though, like what does that mean? Like what comes to your mind when someone says that and just being from Detroit?
that's like when you hear it's like our own like fraternity sorority. You hear what up though? You real. You from the city. I know where you from. We have like
Yeah.
other tests like how do you pronounce this? Are you really from Detroit? Because some people be like, I'm from Detroit. And then I'm like, what part? They'd be Southfield. I'm like, that's the suburbs, baby. That's the
Yep.
suburbs. Anything past 8 Mile, you don't
Yep.
belong. But that's kind of like our call out phrase. That's kind of that acknowledgement. Some black men, black people got the nod. You hear the what up though? I'm like, that's fam right there. And when I tell you I've done the what up does, just filling out a room and I heard somebody respond, I said Detroit. And one thing about Detroit, like other cities, Detroit has this rap. I know Detroit ain't innocent. Detroit's had, a little bit of history.
For
They
sure.
had for a while, I think they were top 10 violent cities in the United States. We still might be top 10. I pray for the city every night. But
Yeah.
it's just that
That's
familiar,
how I feel about Jackson.
no. It's like someone, when you grew up in an environment, there are certain things about me and the way I do things that not other people will understand. If you weren't from the city, you don't understand why I'm always, you have like certain tendencies, idiosyncrasies that certain people, unless you grew up the way I grew up, you don't necessarily understand everything. So when I hear what up though, I'm like, that guard can come down a little bit.
You mentioned so many things, like just the culture. The one thing you have not mentioned yet is the music and the artists. Now, the first person that comes to my mind, Detroit wise, first person is Big Sean. I'm a huge Big Sean fan.
I kid you not. Growing up, okay, we knew about Eminem, but I
Mhm.
felt like growing up, Big Sean was that first Black Detroit rapper that you really identified with because for one,
Right.
he went to Cass Tech. Cass Tech is, sorry, Renaissance, but it's probably the biggest and most well known Detroit public school downtown in the heart. Back when I was coming up, they had like the top football program, back-to-back state champions. Cass Tech carried weight, and also Cass Tech. It was like everybody knows Cass Tech. I have relatives that went to school with him at the time, showing me yearbook pictures. Like this, Sean. Like it just felt like that certain
Yeesh.
connection. Like it was one off, like 1 degree of separation from somebody actually knowing him. And then he's still in the city. I see videos, somebody pull up on the side of him, they having a whole conversation. I'm like, that is the dopest thing. So I will say growing up, Big Sean reminds me of middle school. That's where you like, oh my God, Big Sean. I'm like, and then when he did that collab with Cash Money, I'm like, with Dance, I said, he made it. And that's one thing I will say about Detroit. Anytime we really see somebody out there and making it, we support.
Oh, how did you get into basketball? What made you interested in all of that?
I grew up at the prime time. It was Detroit basketball. I started playing in like when I was 5. So
Mhm.
that's right around the era when Detroit was good, started winning again. I remember kindergarten, that '04 kindergarten. I was in kindergarten or first grade. We went to the parade. So
Mhm.
basketball was just such a big thing. It was ingrained in Detroit culture. We were winning, went back to the finals. It was just a high time to where when I tell you basketball camps, everything just popped up. They're like, oh my God, Pistons. When a team's doing well, the city takes note. Shock were also doing well. First title, I believe, was in '03. So you had WNBA, NBA, Detroit doing well. So basketball was just huge at that point. I didn't know how tall I was going to be, but I just fell in love with ball. It was just something, I did in the neighborhood. We had parks. It was that time I had with my dad, just shooting around, just having fun. I met all my friends through ball. So played ball my entire life. Got into volleyball in middle school, just did 2 sports because volleyball kept me, in shape for basketball. There was
Right.
no layover period. And then high school, doing volleyball. Oh, you're kind of fast. Let's run some track. Why
Yeah.
not? How hard could it be to run? When I tell you they punished me and put me in that 400, I
Yep.
said, and the worst part is they had us all race and I just ran it normally. I didn't think anything of it. Like, and apparently I had the fastest time. Little did I know the people I ran with purposely ran slower because they knew what they were doing.
Oh
Like
my.
the juniors and the seniors, they ran slow. I'm like, I was wondering, like, how did I beat this person? Only to
Yeah.
find out they didn't want to run that 400. I
So they
said,
let
why
they
do you
left
try?
they left you to do
Oh, our 400 was half freshmen and then a couple seniors that they took from the mile and put them in the 400. So that's kind of how I got sucked into it. And I just like being active. I was that type of person where I'm still to this day, I work out. It's that, I went to high school at Detroit Country Day. Our motto was sound mind and a sound body. And I still incorporate that into my everyday life. Working out, it's that stress relief. It's that, that's where I go get my mental health breaks. I'll step out of work, hey, I'm about to go to the gym, or I'll get a call saying, hey, can you talk? They're like, do I hear running? Yes, you hear running. I'm at the gym. So that's kind of
absolutely.
like one of the things that high school, going through high school, going through school, I don't know, just like my solace. Basketball has always been that comfort zone, great memories with friends and my father. So I just kind of kept it going.
And you mentioned this earlier. You went to Notre Dame. Very different from an HBCU experience. What led you to Notre Dame and why?
Just growing up, I was. I was very sheltered growing, so didn't really get out the house too much other than basketball. Grew up non-denominational Christian family. So mom was really, parents were strict. I'm grateful for that now. Because
Yeah.
growing up, you have strict parents. You're like, oh my gosh, like you're just kind of frustrated seeing your friends get to do stuff, but understanding, the older you get, understanding a lot of that was protection. A lot of
Oh,
things
absolutely.
that, yeah, a lot of things that happen. I'm happy that my parents were a little bit stricter on me. So, when it came time to decide college, it was just my mom basically my parents told me, we want you to go somewhere where if something ever happens to you, we can hop in a car and get to you immediately. And that, I'm from the Midwest. We drive. Like I come from a family that used to drive from Detroit to Atlanta yearly.
Oh,
So
wow.
they a drive, but they kind of kept it in a box. So it
Yeah.
was really more so Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, somewhere relatively close. And I remember most of my family went to Michigan. So that was the main pool. I kind of went a little different. I applied to Spelman just because I did have family in Atlanta and I thought my parents would be okay with, pushing me, letting me go down there because I did have a base. So
Yeah.
it was Michigan, Notre Dame, Northwestern, Spelman, and just, doing my research, taking my visits. One, it came down to financial aid.
Yeah.
Being a first gen college student, just being in that position, I was happy to go to college, but also you have to make it make sense for you. You didn't
Exactly.
I never wanted to go and graduate with like 80K in debt. I'm like, "Oh my god, I'll drown." So I'm already, some as a first gen kid, you already feel like you kind of starting behind a little bit because a lot of the people I was talking to, they went to my mentor, she went to college, her father went to college, her mother,
Right.
grandparents, they actually went pretty far back. So this whole process was new for me. So that's one thing. And also the thing about Notre Dame that separated it was faith. Growing up in that Christian background, being an usher at church twice a week. In the summer, they had church on Saturday. So
Yeah.
I was in church Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. And then we still did, my mom served in the church. So we had, they go do serve meetings on Tuesdays. So it's like, I've been in the church half my life, pretty much. I'm still in church Sunday and Wednesdays. I actually serve now. So faith was a big thing. And just having an opportunity. Notre Dame pretty much paid for a group of us to go to Notre Dame, see the campus. And my mom saw how close it was. The Amtrak train was like 4 hours, 3.5, 4 hours. Perfect driving distance for her. She drove me down. It was 3 hours. The way she the way she drives now is 2.5 hours. Take that as take that as you will, but it's a very close drive. And just one thing, when I did feel out of place at Notre Dame, I always could lean on my faith. They did have something, it's called Joyful Mass, which was
Mhm.
basically a mass done in kind of like the African American Methodist tradition. So we're singing some Kirk Franklin, we're singing some Fred Hammond. And I love that I can go to that type of space, connect, be with God. But also, we still have mass. I went to Catholic mass, something different. Still
Right.
took things away from it. So that's faith is what really sold me. So even when I had those moments where I'm like, OMG, this is way different from Detroit,
Right.
you still found solace. You found peace. There were, places where you could just go talk to a priest, go pray, which I appreciated. But looking back on it now, I'm grateful for my experience. Kind of causes you to get comfortable with yourself. I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
black. It ain't gonna change. So you kind of
Exactly.
learn that being comfortable, being confident in yourself, and you also just appreciate that growth process. So now looking at it now, I'm like, okay, I'm happy to be in a position now to where if I did have children, maybe the reasons I chose a school was primarily financial. Maybe I can help them out with that so it's not the same, you know, they do have an opportunity to go to a HBCU. I was okay with
Exactly.
Spelman. I love Spelman. The funny thing is Spelman didn't have sports at this point. They got rid of their entire sports department, but I was still drawn to Spelman.
Yeah.
Maybe it was that, stump the yard, that drum line growing up that made me wanted to go to a
Definitely
black
the
college.
drum line.
Man, whew, when I tell you back in the day, we used to take trips, so we had a portable DVD player.
Yeah.
I don't even think they still make them anymore, but we took so many trips, so we usually had two.
Mhm.
Drumline, like the list of movies we had Drumline, Lilo and Stitch, Nemo, Hawk. I was watching Drumline when I tell you that.
Yes. I can't tell you how, as someone who was in the band in high school and was a section leader of the drum line, listen to me. I watched drumline when I didn't have band practice in middle school. I watched drumline probably every day or every other day.
Man, did you see the famous HBCU battles? And they put Devin Miles in the sheet music. I said, "Oh,
Yes.
perfect!" Whoever did that one. So
Yes.
and that was like my introductory to HBCUs.
What would be your top three HBCU classics?
Oh, easy. Boombox. And it's
Oh
not even for football. Boombox
no.
is more so. Boombox is more so because my favorite two bands are going at it.
Oh,
Human
absolutely.
Jukebox and Sonic Boom. I'm not even worried about the football. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to see the bands. I don't
Yeah.
care about it with that matchup. The matchup. Okay, football. I want to see the bands. It's just
Yeah.
something about Southern got that. Southern got that flair. Jackson got that swag. I will say their drum line is just that swag is smooth, like they Kappas or something. It's just a very
Oh,
smooth
wow.
drum line that I appreciate.
Wow.
Uh, but those I would say those two are two of my favorite bands. So Boombox is number one. You got to go by you.
Yeah.
Southern and Grambling, I like the rivalry that both of them can be 0-8 when they meet up. They playing both teams playing like they 8-0. I never forget the year. I'm like Bayou Classic. Grambling had a rough year.
Mhm.
Southern, I'm like, okay, Southern needed to win to go to the SWAC championship, and I'm like, I said, ooh, I should have never counted Grambling out. Grambling said it don't matter. It don't matter. We 3-4. We about to not, we about
This
to
is our
punch that.
championship.
Pretty much. That's their
Yeah.
championship.
Oh yeah.
So love that. And then, more recently, I'm gonna say the Orange Blossom Classic, but I saw on Twitter y'all call it the Blue Blossom Classic.
Uh-oh. Which we are going to get into that in just a couple minutes.
It's just knowing that matchup has pretty much predicted the SWAC the last three, like 2-3 seasons.
Yeah.
That's what's top on my list. You can't. I'm like, whoa, two heavy hitters going at it.
Yep.
You can't deny that. So those are my top three.
This is where things get interesting. And we'll have all season to watch everything unfold. But I'm gonna start with the sweat first. Now, you have said this to me even offline, but Jackson State fans are Jackson State fans. In the last two seasons, Jackson State has found its way in the Celebration Bowl. They also left the Celebration Bowl with two L's. This is a whole new season now, and I don't mean no shade in it because I'm from Jackson, like
I
so
know, I know it's absolutely no shade from you.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
good seeing a realistic perspective because,
yeah,
you know, like I Notre Dame's a football school. I've heard, oh, Notre Dame doing this. I'm like, okay, okay, it's okay.
yeah,
I'm gonna pray for you. I don't know. It might come from me being a Lions fan, a Pistons fan, and I'm used to disappointment. So I like temper expectations,
yeah,
but it's like the realist. I'm like, I've been through this. The thing with Jackson, I will say coming into this football season, Jackson State has more unknowns than any other team.
yeah,
I will say TC Taylor recruited the hell out of that transfer portal, high
yeah.
school, that roster he's comprised, excellent on paper.
And the
We've
coaching
seen
staff.
numerous times, coaching staff, we've seen numerous times where everything looks good on paper, but something isn't clicking on the field. And just looking at the way their season starts, they don't lull into their season. Oh, heck, they don't have that real opportunity to learn each other, gel, build a rapport. Oh, they got heavy hitters. South Carolina
Yeah,
State, FAM, Southern. They have Texas State. They're on the road the first half of the season. And it's
Yep.
like for a team that's had so much turnover, I don't think that's good to start off that hard. And who's to say, you have a new quarterback? I don't know who's the quarterback that's going to be named. I know who Jackson State fans are hyping up. But when I watched that spring game, the quarterback that impressed me the most? Grayson Thompson. And he wasn't on anybody's list getting mentioned.
No,
I like
not at
to
all.
throw on time. Jason Brown made a couple. Is it Brown? Jason made a couple good throws.
Yeah,
It's a couple throws where I'm like, he made one throw. I'm like, this is the difference Jackson State fans don't know. How elite Shador was and
Mhm.
how great, how accurate he was, and how he was able to lead his receiver with just enough to keep them going. It was like one
Exactly.
throw. I'm like one throw where I'm like, Shador would have made that. That would have been six, which, is still early. He still has time to develop that. But I don't think Jackson State fans realize how well Jackson State did because they had the best quarterback in HBCU football, best and purest pocket passer. That right there alone put them ahead of a lot of teams. When you
Right.
got a quarterback that can make those 30, 40-yard throws, you don't see too many HBCU quarterbacks that can do that, comfortable doing that can run and scramble if needed. That was a big advantage. That defensive unit, big advantage.
Oh gosh.
Aubrey Miller, James Houston, NFL right
Now
now.
sadly.
Aubrey didn't get drafted, but I would be very surprised if he isn't on the Dolphins roster this year.
Right.
Isaiah Bowden, drafted with the
Yep.
Patriots. I
Yep.
fully expect him to make the roster as well. That level of talent, but it's also that level of talent that had a rapport and they knew how to play together. This year, you asking so many new and moving pieces to come in immediately, and they already have the expectations from last season kind of in their face. You got TC Taylor. He's been around football. He's still a first year head coach. He's
Exactly.
calling the shots this year. So there's just a lot. And I feel like their schedule doesn't give them any wiggle room to learn. It's like trial by fire instantly. And
Exactly.
you don't know. I say Jackson State at best. At best, I'm going 8-3. That's, those first couple weeks, they might split them 2-2 and then move on and dominate the rest. That 8-3 still puts them in contention, potentially for a SWAC title.
Right.
It depends because you also have to, if they do lose to FAMU, you also got to count on, you know,
Family
the
lose.
FAMU run the table. Because if
Exactly.
they don't run the table, then that redemption's right there.
Yeah.
So it's open, but at worst, them figuring out, they don't figure out fast enough. I can see them being 6-5. That struggling that
Honestly,
first.
that's my real like honest to God truth. That's my real core prediction. I think anywhere between 6-5 and 7-4 is where they would finish, in my opinion.
I can see it, and from a team that's been undefeated in the SWAC for 2 years, I can see how that's a letdown. But also understand this is a new team. You're gonna
Exactly.
have to give them some wiggle room and some leash. But also, I feel like with TC, I feel like long term they're gonna be fine.
Yeah, they
I
are.
have no issue with them. They have good pieces, good talent. It's just you gotta. The ask is a lot so soon.
I think fans will have to understand that. I mean, and like TC's well light. Like let's that's also I have to make sure I
Great
put that out there.
recruiter.
Like, and granted,
Great.
things change, and it's not about whether or not somebody I guess likes a coach. It's about how effective that coach is in helping that program and that team win. But I do think that he'll get some grace in this first season, considering all the success that has been through the program. But I think that the expectations for just this first season has to be you know not as high as the last two seasons. Jackson State is still going to have a strong brand of football, not only just amongst HBCUs, but just football in general. The culture, all those things will still be there. Now, will the wins be the same as they were? We don't really know yet. But as you mentioned, like those first four games, It's going to be tough. Usually they don't play
On the
Southern
road?
until somewhere along the lines of mid-October or November.
Yes. And that not only do you have South Carolina State, we know Buddy Pugh.
Oh,
We know that
absolutely.
we know
And
that
they do
team
too.
hard enough to come into play.
Right.
That's some nitty gritty, dig your dirt in the feet, dig your dirt, heel in the ground, see what you can do. Are you going to get pushed off this line? Yes or no? You want to know the team I feel like has the most pressure? FAMU.
Oh, yeah.
They have the
They do.
absolute most pressure. Like, if I love Willie, I love the Rattlers, but if they don't win this year, go ahead, pack it up. Come on, go back to the MEAC. You got to go back to the MEAC at that point. I feel like they have the most because they didn't have any turnover. Willie's still there, coaching still intact. Musa is back. You recruited him some receivers to replace what you had in Xavier Smith. FAMU didn't lose too much. They hit the positions that they needed. You got younger. They got a couple tall guys at wide receiver. It didn't matter for Xavier Smith. He was about 5'8", 5'9", and
Yeah,
still
yeah.
did
He
his
was
thing.
no taller than me.
And they still did what they need to. I feel like FAMU, they have the pressure. I'm excited. I'm kind of hoping. I wonder, will the SWAC break through? You would have thought the last 2 years on paper the SWAC would have broken through, but that nitty gritty, that balance of MEAC football, I don't think it's going to happen this year. But I
Yeah.
will say this year, Central still strong. They're still my
Oh, yeah.
favorite to repeat.
That's my favorite coming out of the MEAC still.
They still have Pee Wee, Davius
Yeah.
Richard. He's still
Yep.
back.
He's a
I've
dog.
seen this boy play healthy. I've seen him play hurt. I've seen him win a game with 5 touchdowns and he can barely put any weight on his foot, on his ankle.
Right.
So very tough. Still have Mookie Collier coming back. They added some receiver depth for him. I think Central's fine.
Is it any specific team that you feel that could give Central a run for its money
In the
right now?
MEAC, I'm gonna go. Here's what I want to say. I'm gonna go South Carolina State. South Carolina State had pretty much the work like a terrible season last year, and they were still the only HBCU team to knock Central off. It's
Right.
something about Buddy Pugh, his experience, his scheme that knows how to prepare those guys for those moments.
Right.
So even with the down year, you still knocked off the Celebration Bowl champion. That's incredible. So it says a lot. So I will say South Carolina State, but also their biggest matchup is Howard. When I tell you, okay, I mentioned most people, a lot of Andscape is Black. A lot of them are HBCU alums, primarily from Howard. I like what Larry Scott's doing. They're coming out of, tumultuous era, and you can see the pieces getting put together. My Celebration Bowl prediction, I'm going to go Central, and I'm going to go FAMU. It might change midway through. Southern might surprise me. I've seen what Hugh Jackson's done at Grambling.
That's
Grambling
a
got
team that I want to see what they.
I'm mad they don't play
intrigued
Jackson
to see what they do.
I'm mad Jackson doesn't play Grambling this year. There's a lot. It's so much up in the air. A lot of good players, household names that we've been watching for years have graduated. You're waiting on that next man up. Who's the next man up?
Exactly.
And it might take a couple games to see that. FAMU lost Isaiah Land. I'm like,
and that's not something that you could easily replace
at all.
At all.
So who's stepping up there?
But I want to shift gears really quick before I get you out. While you do a lot of stuff in terms of covering HBCU sports, you also have done some stuff with women's sports, particularly basketball. And you've had some great stories. I remember the story you did about the group of ladies that you talked about with the hairstyles, the protective hairstyles, and why they, braid their hair and things like that. But I want to ask you this. When you look at the state of women's basketball, specifically college basketball, are you a fan of the transfer portal and what NIL has been able to do to transform the lane of women's college basketball as the way we see it now?
Oh, absolutely. Big fan of transfer portal, big fan of NIL. And I just like how a lot of these things have worked together to grow the game of women's basketball. I remember growing up, one of the main reasons I applied to Notre Dame, I remember seeing Skylar Diggins. I remember the headbands. We all wanted to be like her, and
A
just
legend.
seeing that type, straight up, all of us seeing her as, a young, beautiful woman that would kill her on the court,
Yeah.
dopest floater. She's the reason I spent the whole summer in that gym on that floater. It was just chef's kiss. And
Yeah.
I just remember love seeing that, and now seeing how NIL was kind of amplified that it's not just one player anymore, multiple different players. Like seeing Angel Reese in her bag, I'm like, yes, like she's actually benefiting off of this now. Some,
Right.
Skylar Diggins would have made bank. All them headbands we were buying. That's just me and my friend group. They had
Think
to
about it
match
this way.
every single color. When I tell you I had black, white, I had a neon just because in case I wanted to show out. She
Yeah.
had zebra prints, so I love how NIL, and I know people have so many different views on the transfer portal, but I like how, it's added a little bit of parity. You have teams that will stack up all this talent. When you stack up that much talent college wise, not everybody plays. So you're seeing
Right.
a lot of these, you might see five top players go to like a South Carolina, not all five. Well, fortunately, that last group, the Fabulous Five with Aaliyah Boston, Zaya Cook, Letitia M. here, Bree Beal. There's more. Is that whole group stuck together and made it through, but not every group does that. So the transfer portal is just distributing some of that talent. Even if you look at the SWAC, top team in the SWAC, Jackson State, has benefited off of that talent.
Right.
Women's basketball, men's basketball. You want to know why Power Fives are thinking twice about booking HBCUs now? Because that talent has been spread and dispersed around so evenly that, hold on, you think you going to Jackson and getting an easy win? Oh
No.
no, you saw a lot of upsets last year, and a lot
Yep.
of these teams benefited off the transfer portal. You know, guy went to, hometown kid went to a big school, didn't pan out, came to his local school and is balling out. He
Right.
has that division with the talent. They can play. So I feel like when HBCU ball, it's actually, initially people thought, oh, it's gonna, hurt and harm HBCUs. No, that talent coming in, that they're building it out, and I think it's beautiful to see. That's why when you see some of those upsets, when you see Texas Southern doing some things, you're like, all corn. I said, see, this is that talent that's coming through.
Exactly.
So I think it's actually been good. Have there been players that have been poached from HBCUs? Yeah, but it's not as bad. It's more players, more good players coming in than more players being poached.
Right.
So it goes both ways. I would like to see NIL funnel a little bit more through HBCU communities just because I know how much support and pull the HBCU community has. There's no reason these brands shouldn't be reaching out to these athletes.
You said you had some other projects that you're working on. What are some of those, if you can share with us, and where can people follow you to continue to follow your work?
I'm right now working on a project about, HBCU facilities,
Mhm.
that costs what it takes to maintain some of these facilities, and, a lot of what it takes to, raise money. After seeing that Ed Reed debacle, it kind of had me thinking, because I remember coming in, I'm like, man, I think I asked somebody, I'm like, okay, where's your practice facility? Because Notre Dame, when I tell you there was so much construction, men, like our basketball team has they don't practice in the arena. They have a separate area to practice.
Mhm.
Football, they don't practice in the stadium. They have a practice field.
Right.
So just learning that, and they're like, no, they practice in the stadiums. So learning that and just kind of diving deep into, people talk about, oh, the facilities aren't as great, but there are a lot of HBCUs that have made that investment. Alabama State's one of them. Mississippi Valley, they're putting into their facilities. So just following what it takes to, get these brand new fields, what it takes to upkeep them. And, it's a couple schools that, they're years out from getting a new field, but it's on their radar and they're raising money. So that's my next project, just to put some things into perspective. Look at some of, when people say don't go to a HBCU because their facilities aren't up to par. That's a whole discussion.
Exactly.
This is probably going to be a more than a one story project, but it's
It
one
should
worth
probably
having.
be a series of stories.
It's really going to be. So that's something I'm working on now. Anybody that wants to follow my work, Twitter took away our checks. I know I'm sad. I had my check for like a couple months before it got snatched
Yeah.
by Elon Musk. But follow me at I am Mia Berry, and also follow at Andscape. So we have a lot of work coming out. We're still doing, we had like our video podcast. We have work and things we're working on for this upcoming season, working on bringing a couple things back. Who
Yeah.
knows? You might be the first guest on my show.
Oh wow, that would be an honor, ladies and gentlemen. Mia Berry is a star when it comes to covering HBCUs. Mia, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we will definitely talk soon again.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for the next episode of the Red Diamond Report podcast. Until then, make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at the RDR Report, and follow me on Twitter at Wilton Reports and on Instagram at Wilton Reports _.